Hi, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to demonstrate how I painted this marsh scene in pastels using one of my reference photos taken here in the Lowcountry. So please stay with me as I demonstrate how to paint soft clouds and cloud reflections in the water. So let's get started with the sky and clouds first. I am using an assortment of blue shades of pastels that you can see here on my paper towel. I'm using Uart 500 grade sanded paper for this demonstration, and I will be using sponge applicators for blending my pastels rather than using my fingers. These sponge applicators are usually sold with pan pastels, but I'll be sure to leave some links in the description area below to some of the supplies that I'm using. I have already drawn some light lines for the clouds and marsh area. So I want to place my background sky before I begin developing the cloud formations. I'll be using a few shades of colors to render these cloud formations. Clouds are not just white and gray, but have many hues of colors that make up the shapes. So I've added some marks of color to the area before I start blending them together. I am shading areas with light gray, dark gray, medium gray, slate blue, and a little bit of the peach color for highlights, and a very light shade of blue for most of the cloud formation. I have the darkest colors of gray and slate blue at the bottom of the cloud formation where it's the heaviest. And once I have blended these colors and shapes together to try and make some cloud formations out of this, I will come back later with the white pastel to give the cloud shape and fullness. But this is the last step in the cloud formation. So now I can begin to see some shape to my clouds as I blend some more. I can see where I need to add a little more dark color between some of these clouds to give them a little more definition. I'm starting to add some white pastel to the edges of some of these cloud formations to bring them out and give them some more dimension. The light is casting onto the clouds, and these areas will stand out more than the darker areas. So for the next couple of minutes, I'm going to continue adding more white to some of these areas to bring them out more vividly, and the shape and light reflections will become more obvious. Next, I want to complete the skyline below our cloud formation. I'm using a very light blue as my base layer, and I'm bringing in some brighter blue that I'll blend with my sponge applicator. I'll come back with my dark blue to add a darker base to our cloud formation, along with some slate blue to blend the top section to the bottom section a little more smoothly. I will blend this area and try to tone down the values a little bit, but you can begin to see the different areas of our cloud formation and how the heaviest area at the bottom is darker and it represents the shelf of a cloud formation. However, I don't want it to look like a storm cloud, so I will lighten and blend it as I move on, but I think it's a good start for my blocking in phase of the clouds. Sometimes it's just a matter of experimenting with your pastels to achieve the fullness of your clouds. I'm pretty happy how the cloud formation is turning out. So this completes my blocking in process, so I can move on to the rest of the painting. I'll come back to the clouds later to fine tune some of the details and highlights in the clouds, but for now I can move on to the rest of the painting. I have shifted my paper up so that you can see the entire surface of the bottom section of the picture. I am using a reference photo from our area here in the Low Country that you can see in the upper right corner of my screen, and I am referencing the river and the banks of the marsh area, but I didn't want to have the same gray drab colors found in the reference photo. I wanted to have a bluer sky and blue water for this demonstration, so that is why I decided to do a different sky background with lighter clouds rather than the pending rain clouds seen in this photograph. I started out with a very light blue to blend into the grain of the paper first, and this is my second layer of blue that I am blending together to our creek in the marsh. Sanded paper does have a gritty surface, so it's important to establish a few layers of pastel to achieve a smooth texture in your painting. The colors in the creek area are still a little bit light, so I'm going to add another layer of color to begin filling in the paper and giving it a little bit more color saturation. I'm going to add another layer of color to this top area of the creek, and then I will be able to move on for a little while and start on the green marsh fields. The Uart sanded paper does hold a lot of layers of pastels. As you've already seen, I've applied 3 or 4 applications of color to the creek area, and it still is able to hold much more color to the layers of the paper. For the most distant trees in the horizon, I'm using a slate blue for that distant area. I'm switching to a very dark green color to begin blocking in the background tree line. These small square hard pastels from NuPastel are perfect for blocking in a small area of tree lines. Next, to give these trees a little bit of shape and color, I'm using a lighter shade of green to create some fullness to these trees. I am switching to a light brown pastel to begin developing the banks of the marsh grasses at low tide. I will apply a darker shade of brown to the top of the bank of the marsh and the lighter color as it nears the water line. I'll blend these two colors together, and then I'll begin working on the grasses on the right side. I'm going to use a little bit of black to define the very edge of the mud area to the bottom of the tall grasses. Normally I don't really use much black, but as I blend the black and greens together, it'll create a darker shade of green. I'll continue to use my sponge applicator to blend these areas because they are a very small, tight space to be blending. I'm using olive green for the top section of the grasses, and I'll blend these darker values into the lighter olive green. I'm going to try some lime green for the distant grasses beneath the tree line. I am following my guidelines to place the grasses in the marsh, and I'm going to use my small black pastel to mark some of the grasses where the root of the grasses is very dark and prominent in the mud area of the marsh. Once I've identified those peaks in the grasses, I then can come back with my dark green and begin shaping some of the tall grasses in these little bundles of grasses. At this point, I'm following my reference photo very carefully, trying to achieve a realistic feel to the marsh grasses. If you look closely at my reference photo up in the corner of my screen, you can see how the hue and values of the grasses are changing as it recedes into the background. So I've switched to my olive green, still using my hard pastels to block in the field of grasses in the distance and closer to the water's edge. I'm going to block in the bank of the marsh on the left side of our picture, and I'm using a dark brown to create the wetter, darker, muddy area along the grass line. I want to have all my marks and colors in place before I begin blending them. I'm going to add a little bit more of this light tan to the edge of my water line to give it the same color and value as the bank on the right side. I'm going to switch to a tan green area to fill in the empty spot in the meadow on the left side of our marsh grasses. Now I am ready to blend these colors together and create the effect of tall grasses. Now as I blend these grasses using a vertical stroke, the realism of their texture is beginning to show. Some artists use a much more looser style or impressionistic style for the grasses, but I like to have a little more precision and a little more realism in my style of pastel painting. There's a small pool of water along the edge of our creek, and I'm going to add some of the dark shading along the edge of the bank of the marsh. Now that the grasses are shaping up very nicely, I'm going to begin adding some of the shadows that are being cast into the water's edge from the tall grasses. So I'll blend this grass reflection over the water here a little bit, and then I would like to continue adding some more color to our creek water. I want to add some of that peach color into the reflections of our water and continue to add some more shades of blue to the water that is reflecting from the skyline. I'm going to use my dark green to add some marsh reflections to the edge of the water line. I'll blend it a little bit and then pull the color a little bit into the water to represent some of the grasses. I'll add a little bit more very, very light blue to the edge of the water to add a little bit of the cloud reflections here. I'm going to add some small trails of water that's running down the banks of the marsh, and also that the light is reflecting a little bit off these little pools of water. Next, I'll add some grass reflections on the right side of the creek, and I'll blend it lightly to give it a smooth, reflective quality. Next, I would like to create a mirror image of my cloud formation in the water. I've taken a picture of my artwork of the cloud formation so that I can flip it in and form a mirror image of the cloud. I am going to turn my artwork upside down so that I can draw this cloud formation in the water. I'm zooming up on my artwork, and I've added the little thumbnail of the cloud that I'm trying to replicate up in the corner, and I don't need to match it exactly, but I want to come close to the cloud formation. Once I'm satisfied with the shapes, then I can turn my artwork around and you can see how it is a very close reproduction of my first cloud. It would have been a lot more challenging if I hadn't had the flipped image to work from. I hope you have enjoyed this demonstration on painting clouds and reflections in the water, along with the creek and marsh areas. I just have a few minor touch-ups and highlights to add, and this painting is done. If you liked this video, please press like and please leave a comment below. I look forward to sharing more videos and demonstrations with you in the near future. If you haven't subscribed, please do so you don't miss any new episodes. Thank you for joining and see you next time.